Please welcome moderator Jennifer Potter and the Carbon and Energy Efficiency Panel.
Pauhana begins in 45 minutes. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to stand between the Pauhana and the end of this conference. And we're all excited to be here. My name is Jennifer Potter. I go by Jenny. I work for Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. And I'm here with a distinguished panel of guests. And I'm going to introduce each one of them briefly, and then we'll get on with the agenda. But first off is Ms. Carilyn Shon. She is the Energy Program Administrator for the Hawaii State Energy Office. And in the Hawaii State Energy Office is a division of the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. And Ms. Shon has extensive experience working on several energy programs and policies, and with a specific and special interest in buildings. So we'll hear a little bit about that moving forward. Next, we have Chris Badger, who's come all the way from cold Vermont, and he's a senior consultant, yes, with Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, or VEIC. It's typically known as Efficiency Vermont, so you probably heard of that before. Chris has joined Efficiency Vermont in 2009, and he specializes in the design and evaluation of emerging technologies and innovative energy efficiency program strategies. Chris develops new initiatives targeting commercial and residential buildings for Vermont's statewide energy efficiency utility, Efficiency Vermont, and the District of Columbia Sustainable Energy Utility. One thing that's really interesting about Efficiency Vermont is that it is the licensed energy efficiency utility. It's the only one in the nation, and it uses public benefit funds, very similar to our beloved Hawaii Energy here. And last but certainly absolutely not least is Ms. Caroline Carl. She's with the Hawaii Energies. She's a deputy director of Hawaii Energy. She oversees the detailed planning and execution of a range of residential and commercial energy efficiency programs. She's responsible for the design and implementation of innovative initiatives to help Hawaii Energy achieve its energy savings targets while helping Hawaii families and businesses save energy and money. So welcome to our distinguished panelists here. Thanks for being with us today. So the topic of our panel here is carbon and energy efficiency, and we're going to discuss the connection. And we're going to kick off first with focusing on how energy efficiency actually is effective in reducing carbon. And we've spent a lot of time, so far talking about a lot of policies today at a high level and thinking about ways to decarbonize in Hawaii and across the world, actually. This is a really unique panel because we actually have the opportunity to kind of dig into some of the metrics behind the policies. And I think we'll spend some time there today. I'm going to begin by asking the panelists pretty much a very similar question. Carilyn's is a little bit special. She has special treatment because she's the administrator. And then I'll pose to each one of them to kind of get the conversation started, and then we'll take it from there. But Carilyn, I have a question for you. So what can Hawaii do in the very near term to reduce carbon emissions?
Thank you for the question, Jenny. And thank you all out there after a very long day in a semi-darkened room. I appreciate your being here. I thought we would just be the only ones here in the room. But gee, thanks for proving me wrong. But anyway, the question is, what can we do here and now? And I feel that with my special interest in buildings, the counties need to adopt the updated energy building code because it is here and now. The counties have the 2006 energy building code and the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code is ready and willing to be adopted. It's been passed unanimously by the State Building Council, Building Code Council. It's been adopted and signed into admin rule by the governor for all state buildings built. So any new buildings or major renovations have to follow this code. And all that's left is for the counties to adopt it as ordinance for their building code so that every condominium, every hotel, resort, every new home will be more energy efficient. And for the condos, the commercial buildings, The shopping centers, they will be 30 to 40% more efficient in operations. And what does this mean for our conference today, talking about carbon? Well, I'll tell you because I have the numbers. For the equivalents, the energy code is expected to save over 3.5 million metric tons of greenhouse gases if the code is adopted very shortly. So there's a tremendous impact to what we're discussing today. The energy code, if adopted in a timely manner, has a savings of the equivalent for Oahu, for those of us from Oahu, of running at 100% of at maximum capacity of 3 generating units on Oahu. Kalailoa, which is about 13% of the load or the generation capacity on Oahu, AES, which is 12%, and Kahe 6, which is about 9%. So that's a significant savings, and with it, a significant reduction in greenhouse gases. So that's why Jenny was very sweet and very kind to ask me this very special question. So I ask all of you here to urge your county councils to please move on the adoption of the building code, because it's 2006 on Maui, except for Kauai, which is 2009, and all the other counties are 2006. So please, that's an important thing. And it's also the equivalent, thanks to information from Hawaii Energy. In the year 2036, the code can save in 1 day the equivalent of powering 707,000 homes. That's pretty significant. So we must act as soon as possible. And buildings in the United States consume about 75% of all the electricity produced. So we take for granted, we come in, we go out. These buildings are going to be here a long time. So it's important that we start now. So why is it important that we consider energy efficiency? Because it has long-term effect. So thanks, Jenny, for asking the first question.
Thank you for taking it. Excellent. Okay, so Chris, question for you. In what ways is energy efficiency effective in reducing carbon?
Well, I assume everybody probably knows a portion of this answer, but maybe with a little background, talking about Efficiency Vermont and most energy efficiency programs across the nation, that primarily they were designed in order to achieve a least cost of energy, essentially a first decision in the power mix. And I think what Carilyn was just discussing, which is building codes as well as appliance standards, really become the baseline for building our energy mix. And then it goes up from there, including new innovations and programs. And so Efficiency Vermont, as well as many other states, are now in a position where they're transitioning from focusing strictly on least cost energy and now having to incorporate some of the state policy goals from a low carbon future, high penetration renewables, and what that means from a mix perspective. And so for Efficiency Vermont, that means making decisions that aren't typically in the mandate of the program, and that you may be replacing, say, an oil boiler or furnace with a cold climate heat pump. So switching from an oil fuel and getting deep carbon reductions to a high performance heat pump technology, but that is actually adding electric load. And I think the last question in the last session was a very good one, is how do states and programs and state authorities handle that and transition the program designs appropriately in order to bring EE into a new future in partnership with decarbonization. And so Efficiency Vermont has been very focused on that, but it's also trying to understand exactly what the technologies are that will help that transition. And the beauty of energy efficiency is that it's very incremental. So it's per building, per homeowner, decisions per unit, per widget, per device. And so each one of those may have a specific load profile that may align better with a renewable portfolio with specific peaking issues. And so I think historically what we've seen from an energy efficiency perspective, whether it's in Vermont and other states, is that we were trying to transition loads out of the middle of the day and then have them essentially load managed at nighttime during low cost of energy. What we're seeing is now we're actually trying to move everybody back. So there's some interesting dynamics at play here, but I think the data and the smart devices that are coming into the market are really opening up some new opportunities.
You brought up a really great point right there, too, that I think we should touch on in our panel. And when we consider energy efficiency, that we're not excluding all types of energy. There's water, there's fuels, so this is, even though our panelists here, and myself included, are really focused on electricity, a lot of the concepts that we're talking about today can be translated into other fuel types, and also water. There's efficiency standards across the board. The majority of them are focused on electricity, but as Chris pointed out, some of his programs are crossing that boundary from being a oil, what is it, heater, wait, we don't even know what those are over here, and to an electric one, which is actually increasing electric consumption but lowering carbon targets. But that's part of the idea here, is that, when we think about efficiency, what's the ultimate outcome, and where are we trying to go with that, and what kind of policies are we aligning with? So thank you for bringing that up. So, Ms. Carilyn, I know you offered to us a unique perspective because it is very Hawaii-centric, and so I do want to hear your perspective on how is it that energy efficiency, how is it effective in reducing carbon?
Well, I think that Chris and Carilyn both spoke to a lot of the points that are foundational in what we shared in our video earlier, just about the impact it has on a building incremental level, house by house, building by building. But another really important point that I think has been, a core value of the Hawaii Energy programs, and really previously when the demand side management programs initiated, and 20 years ago, is the importance of engaging across all customers and the contractors and the businesses that serve them, because this is a critical aspect about how we influence the adoption of code, how we influence the supply chain of what's coming to Hawaii, what is ensuring that we are working to build the relationships that are able to influence the market and what's being sold, because as we're getting product coming over here, it has to be the best product in order to really have those lasting effects in the reduction in carbon. And so we have similar discussions offline a lot with Chris, but really, these decisions that customers are making about at the time of purchase are often, can be emotional, or they can be for a variety of reasons outside of the finance aspect of it, although that's very important as well. But we see it as a role that the programs play to ensure that the best products are there, and we are giving them the information that they need in order to be able to make those decisions.
That's great. I think you brought up a great point about how there's this ecosystem that we really do need to involve in getting these technologies over and really persuading the market and moving the market, in fact, to adopt the right technologies for the right locations. And this isn't unique just to Hawaii. It would be the same in Vermont. Like, I don't know what kind of fuel heater you were talking about, So, getting the right people at the table to really to move that market is absolutely important. And it goes back to adopting building codes, apparently. And
I think building a green, the green jobs too, like all of these efforts are, and Dawn mentioned it earlier today, that, through these efforts, we are actually creating jobs and work too.
Exactly. Yep, and that kind of goes back to, there's this wonderful saying, I love it, I live by it, but it's what gets measured is what gets done. And really, when we identify exactly what it is we're trying to achieve with energy efficiency and the kind of metrics that we're using around it, that really does set the stage for what is going to be accomplished. And carbon to date has not really been part of that conversation with energy efficiency, not here in Hawaii, and even a little bit more challenging as well in Vermont. It's starting to move in that direction. And I do want to come back to that, and we can talk about that in a moment. And I wanted to go on to the second topic that was introduced for our session, which is discussing the relationship between demand response and energy efficiency. And I'm going to tackle this first because this is one of my favorite topics in the whole world. So there's this existing misconception about EE eating DR's lunch. And it is a misconception. And the industry experts have been continuing to discuss the interactive effects of energy efficiency and demand response for a decade and a half, at least at this point. And really, when we step back, one could consider that demand response is actually, or that energy efficiency is actually a load modifying demand response, whereby load is decreased and by an efficiency investment. And the timing of the service still remains the same. Energy efficiency, therefore, is really a load modifying type of DR. And in general, it just reduces the need to procure peak capacity resources. So depending on the load types that are upgraded or improved, it is possible that less flexible ramping capacity projects will be required due to energy efficiency. On the other hand, this is where the debate comes in, improved efficiency for an end use that also participates in supply DR reduces the availability of baseline load to active shed. However, here's the challenge I pose to your thinking today. The net sum of the resource is unchanged in general and could be increased through energy efficiency investment. And I'm going to do the same thing that last panel. A little bit of math. Here we go. Ready? So let's consider an example. Consider an HVAC load that has a 10 kW baseline and can be reduced by half that service level, 5 kW, with a dispatchable control as supply DR. If the load is efficiency upgraded with one that uses 70% of the original energy load, and for example, an EE benefit of 30%, then the baseline is now 7 kW, and for the same baseline level of service. If the service level is still reduced by half during a DR event, then this means that there's only 3.5 kW available for supply DR, which is less than the original 5 kW. But the overall effect of the combined EE and DR on the net load is a reduction of 6.5, an increase in total of DR compared to the original configuration that only comes with all the benefits of EE upgrades. If one only considers the availability of supply DR in the absence of the underlying load modifying effects of energy efficiency, an efficiency investment can appear to reduce the quantity of the available demand response. And the moral of this story is, unless we have a lot of struggles thinking about how we can provide multi-attribute services with these types of efficient end uses. Energy efficiency upgrades often present opportunities, and a lot of them, for improving the cost effectiveness of DR-enabled DR control upgrades. It's the foot in the door. And most of the time, I call energy efficiency the gateway drug, because without it, we wouldn't get in a lot of doors. It's the one that makes the capital business sense to people. They get the savings right away. Demand response is a nice layer that goes on the top and that can really provide some pretty awesome grid services. But unless we stop thinking about this unless we stop thinking about this in silos and we start thinking about it more holistically, we're going to continue to run up against the challenge which we have in our industry, which is developing a methodology of cost effectiveness for an integrated portfolio of energy management technologies such as EE, DR, and DERs. So this whole little blurb, I'm going to pitch back over to these folks, but really under the guise of what's the coordination. This brings up the coordination of energy efficiency and demand response. And Carilyn, can you speak to the formal coordination agreement that HECO has made with Hawaii Energy and how this might provide greater impacts to the grid and decarbonization in general?
Yeah, sure. So we have formalized our collaboration efforts with the HECO DR team about 2.5 years ago. So I think Rich is in the audience, but he really spearheaded a lot of this coordination initially to ensure really that we are maximizing the benefit to the customer and minimizing duplication of ratepayer funds. We're looking to really design our efforts going forward on the Hawaii Energy side and working with the DR team to focus on the areas in which we can maximize impact with customers. So we meet monthly. They're great meetings, let me tell you. But really the areas we focus on are programs, planning, and marketing and outreach. And so for programs, the Hawaii Energy portfolio focuses across a broad number of technologies and customer bases, residential and commercial. And so we've been honing in on specific technologies that as the DR programs start to expand and really go to market, are we already tapped in? What contractors are already working to install specific types of technologies, air conditioning, smart stats, things like that, that really have that controllable load and can be of value in the future, potentially, right? On the planning side, this is an important one because it gets back to the metrics discussion that you had mentioned before. We are at a critical place where we've been operating the efficiency programs with a focus on specific kilowatt hour savings, cost-effective kilowatt hour savings, and peak demand reduction. What we utilize to value the avoided cost, all of the areas that are now coming in are becoming more complex. We're working with HECO to ensure that we're identifying what those variables should be as we're looking to the programs of the future. And then, of course, on marketing and outreach, you often do not get more than one chance to talk to a customer and to get in the door. And so to ensure that as these layered or tiered incentives for more attractive technologies are put in place, we are communicating them effectively to customers, and so we can capture the value at that time because it has to be easy for the contractors and it has to be even easier for the customers. Or you could argue it's the other way around. It has to be easy for everyone. But and so that's been a key aspect of our planning process for the coming year, for sure. Some of the pilots that we've been talking about, it's a pretty exciting time because now that the DR application was accepted, we're really looking to launch some more collaborative pilots. With shifted energy, grid interactive water heaters, perhaps something with controls for rooftop air conditioning units. So all areas that have water heating, air conditioning fall into efficiency for sure, but have more value when you look at it across both sides.
That was excellent. Thank you. And so, Chris, just to follow up on that, I'd love to get more the international. We'll start with the national perspective. Okay. So, are there examples of new technologies that are advancing EE and DR coordination and providing stronger platforms for decarbonization on the grid? And how are programs reorienting around these disruptive technologies?
Sure, and just to build off of Caroline's last comment, one interesting aspect of when Efficiency Vermont became a licensed efficiency utility, part of the reasoning behind it was so that you could do long-term planning exercises. And because there is such innovation and some introduction of new technologies, electric vehicles, renewables, that type of planning and everybody sitting at the same table and coordinating is really critical. So I definitely see a lot of value of that, and we see it a lot of their states are advancing that side as well. On the innovation front, I think what may be the most, interesting and disruptive technology that we've seen come into our programs is around the smart thermostats. One, because, and there's two different types of thermostats, like a Wi-Fi, and a thermostat that can communicate bidirectionally. As well as the learning thermostats or smart thermostats. And the difference there is that one is able to do DR functionality, but really isn't changing its energy efficiency performance by much. The smart thermostat or learning thermostats are really interesting, and it's notable that Energy Star stopped providing a specification or a standard for thermostats, programmable thermostats, because they just weren't seeing the energy savings. And so it's a big advancement for smart thermostats in that they're actually proving out in a real-time way that there's significant energy savings, both on the heating and the cooling side. So smart thermostats, the way that they operate, and many people may already know this, but it's engaging with the customer and learning how their behaviors, and as they're heating and cooling their home, what they're doing, but it's reacting to how the heating or cooling system is interacting with the home. So how quickly does it heat up or cool down? Is it running too long? All these things play into its decisions. And then one additional metric is that it's looking at the weather. So it's looking forward in time, trying to understand what's going on outside the home and whether or not there's opportunities for efficiency. So that's all on the efficiency side of the fence, but then there's a huge DR opportunity, not only in just turning things on and off, but because a smart thermostat can essentially load shift. It can do pre-cooling or preheating in order to reduce the demand at a specific time. It can also, as we get to locational efficiency, where it may be in a specific part of a city or a state or a community where that feeder is constrained. And so you can do very specific targeted efficiency at a way that was a lot harder for utilities in the past. So I think that opportunity of combining the EE and DR components is impressive as it is. But one other aspect of that we've started to capitalize on is that we are taking the thermostat data at a very time-specific and micro level and trying to use it to understand how the home's performing so that you can see, based on how fast or slow that the home's heating or cooling, whether or not there's a heating or cooling system upgrade opportunity, whether or not there's an opportunity to add insulation or air sealing. But that's just on the heating side. And so there's new technologies coming out that are in-home, metering on the electric side. And so as we start to wrap all these technologies together in kind of an ideal state of a home energy management system, not only is it able to receive signals about how to react to the grid opportunities for renewables or demand response or efficiency opportunities in a thoughtful way, but it's also creating a feedback loop of data that informs programs moving forward.
That's excellent. And Caroline, yes, please.
We're discussing EE and DR in terms of application to the customer side of the grid. There's also, I think, another EE regarding the grid, and I think it's very important to look at efficiency in the utility grid for generation, transmission, and distribution. That also plays a major part of the whole complex situation, the energy challenge, as well as the opportunities before us.
And you're specifically referring to some of the line losses that occur. As well as generation. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, line losses, as well as generation, old equipment, et cetera.
Right. There are significant opportunities there.
And there was a discussion that I had with a gentleman earlier today, and there's some of the folks in the booths upstairs that are starting to understand this. When we think about energy savings, we think about kilowatt hours and kilowatts, but at the same time, you can have voltage regulation issues, you can have frequency issues that all have impacts on businesses as well as the utility from a generation and transmission perspective. And so what happens when you do targeted EE or DR or with energy storage or renewables is, are you improving the grid? Are you being a good neighbor to the utility and to your neighboring businesses and homeowners? And I think that's where the opportunity for some of these new technologies is headed.
Excellent. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing underlying this is that there's a temporal and geographic aspect to energy efficiency that that should be considered now that hasn't necessarily been part of the conversation previously. When we've been looking at metrics in the past, it's a kWh saved, it's a kW reduced, and then it's also the cost effectiveness around how much savings we're getting. And so we have metrics that are pretty antiquated, actually, for the grid of the future and evolving into this new space where we have technologies that are capable of geographic specificity, that are capable of energy efficiency, targeting, and then even as you're mentioning, shifting, which is now we're starting to blur into this demand response type, boundary that, of our silos over here. But if we're using energy efficiency technologies in order to change the load profile of a user, like via demand response, then it very much is becoming a temporal type of program as well. So I'd like to pitch to you, and when considering this, and one of the questions from our audience, and I was like, thank you for posting this. And it says, the traditional metrics for EE success is a kWh of consumption reduced. Is that the right metric moving forward? Who wants it?
I think I can speak from our program perspective, and of course the answer is it depends. It depends on who we're talking about. I still will advocate for, given the current rate structure, for the individual customer, a kWh saved is value. It is a reduction on their bill, and it is something that they can take, can utilize that money for something else. So it is valuable currently. At that being said, the standard cost-effective test, as we think of the larger grid, the larger customer and then the grid itself, is clearly not enough anymore. So we need to broaden the conversation. I also feel very strongly that we have to think about the customer base, the larger customer base, in terms of equity as well, because many of the changes, as have been discussed today, are not available to every customer. And so what does that mean? There are other metrics for especially the harder to reach, more vulnerable populations that we need to continue to focus on. And in many cases, a kilowatt hour saved is even more impactful in those households.
I think the kilowatt hour saved is very important, but it's also the kilowatt hour not generated, or else kilowatt hour generated by what resource? Those are also very important questions.
And I'm really afraid of queuing up any slides, so I think we can avoid, there it goes. Okay, magic happens. So I think one of the things to recognize is that we've had these same metrics of performance, and they've evolved, meaning so for Efficiency Vermont, one of their metrics now is achieving deep energy retrofits, so that lighting has always been the most cost-effective, very deliberate energy savings opportunity just for the customer as well as for the efficiency programs. And so it's really trying to push and say, okay, so just as Carilyn said, is you do not want to be going back to that customer a second time and pitching something that's less cost-effective. And so what we have as a metric now is achieving a certain number of deep energy retrofits. And that means getting a minimum of 3 different measures installed in a single installation with a single customer. And so it's also thinking longer term about what are your lost opportunities, what happens as there's a transformation within the market from an LED lighting perspective. Are you getting to the place you need to be, which is great, but it's taking one of the most cost-effective opportunities off the table. And so how do you manage that and provide a comprehensive package to the customer? And I think that Carilyn was saying it earlier, which was, how do we package up things in a meaningful way, building on energy efficiency, renewables, and energy storage? And so that's a new conversation to have with customers, and who's having that conversation. Who has built the trust with the businesses, with the homeowners, and making sure that they're the right ones at the table. So from a metrics perspective, I know that what carbon reduction is clearly the topic of conversation, and to not have that as a metric of performance really means that you may or may not be chasing the right technology solution for that application. And so what Carilyn was just mentioning as well is maybe that opportunity is on the utility side as well, going after transformers and making sure the efficiencies are achieved there. But also making sure that our building codes are designed in order to achieve the outcomes that an individual state is looking for from a decarbonization perspective. And those may be unique to an individual state. So Vermont is very different in that we have a very oil-based heating economy. And so that's our big carbon goal. But not to have the funding, which typically comes through a ratepayer-funded program, not have that funding directed to achieve that goal creates real barriers. And so in a similar way, whether you want to talk about electric vehicles or bringing in energy storage as part of the conversation, if you're adding load to the grid, that goes against the traditional mandates of a program. So you have to change the rules of the game in order to accommodate your outcomes.
Do you have anything to add on that?
Oh, I mean, I guess just from an implementation standpoint, in order to implement and be effective, you design your programs based on the metrics. So it's always kind of a push and pull, and establishing those metrics is critical so that you can execute really and reach your goals.
Maybe I could throw one more thing. I know that it's up there and I should talk about it because it's really a hot topic nationwide, and that is the equity or the affordability. And so just making sure that there's that equity built into the programs, but you're doing it in a deliberate way that aligns with the programs and comes to the same outcomes that you're looking for, but just making sure that it's cost effective for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you both have mentioned that actually in terms of the underserved communities, and they are difficult to reach, and often they're in a greater need of some of these efficiency upgrades. I love the video with the Molokai refrigerator exchange program. That was fantastic. The whole community came together to have their refrigerators replaced. They came on one barge. It really was an effort that was brought to them by Hawaii Energy that would not have happened otherwise, and they are an underserved community, and in regards to having access to a refrigerator recycle program or anything else that all of us take for granted, and in a lot of ways those programs are very expensive. They probably don't pencil out, as a matter of fact, and can pull down your portfolio when you're looking overall at what is being done as a portfolio level. How cost effective are we at delivering energy efficiency and reducing carbon? So those challenges when providing services to those communities. Can either of you any of you speak to that a little bit about how you've overcome some of those challenges in providing services to the underserved communities?
Before they speak, I'd like to say a couple of things. I know that Hawaii Energy, as a public benefits fee administrator under the overview of the Public Utilities Commission, has certain requirements for cost effectiveness, et cetera. And sitting on their technical advisory group and their working group, I've always spoken to the benefit of stretching those edges of the envelope. That's why I've always been a great supporter for solar water heating. It doesn't pass the cost-benefit test, but unless you bundle it. And I would like to see more pressing the edges, way beyond the edges of the envelope. And because not everyone, there is inequity, we all agree, and affordability. And so I think there's great benefit by stretching those edges of the envelope. And with that, I'll let the others speak.
Well, maybe to provide an example from Vermont, something that we were pretty proud of is, well, everything started back in 2011 where Hurricane Irene roared through and essentially destroyed a lot of buildings, as well as took out a whole bunch of mobile home parks. And it really became a wake-up call for us statewide that, one, that there was a population that was in jeopardy from increased events like this, but that we were looking at some of these mobile homes, and that it was just a real social inequity from an energy perspective. And so we worked with a housing agency in the state as well as with a foundation, and we pulled together a design for a high-performance modular home that essentially achieved all the outcomes that we were looking for, meaning that it was bringing in some of the most innovative technologies, but then combining it in a very tight thermal shell so that the energy load was very low. And what was unique about the modular home was that in transitioning an individual from a mobile home to a modular home that goes on a foundation, that you actually create what is considered, at least by the federal government, to be, and banks, to be an asset that they can invest in, and so that they have access to preferred, loan rates. Mm-hmm. And so when you pencil it all out, the reduced energy costs as well as the long-term low loan rates, you actually create an affordable option for a high-performance home. So something that you don't think is possible from a retrofit perspective in a low-income community, that all of a sudden you have the best of the best, from a solution perspective.
So from a Hawaii Energy perspective, under our standard resource acquisition portfolio, which is the incentive dollars that we drive to, a certain cost per kWh, we carefully balance the portfolio every year with how we can invest in our small business direct install, which is 50 cents per kilowatt hour, and balance that with where we can get some more cost-effective programs, lighting, more penetration, and through midstream different incentive delivery mechanisms. But I will say that really I think the most impact we have when it comes to making a meaningful long-term behavior change is through our market transformation programs. And this is an area where the Public Utilities Commission has been very, very supportive of us investing the time and the money in getting out in front of people through presentations, workshops, building workforce capacity in getting training out to allies, and really helping to grow and build energy literacy. And we've been effective in doing so and minimizing costs to the best of our ability by partnering with organizations in the community that know their constituents, they know their community members, and they know what they need. And so we're able to better understand and hopefully tailor some of our resource acquisition, cost per kWh programs to be as effective in that location for that community, like the Hui Up, or like work that we've done on solar water heating direct install across all of the jurisdiction, but very heavily on the Big Island, mostly on the Hilo side. So it has to be a team effort for sure, and there are definitely organizations, that economic development boards and other nonprofits that have it really dialed on what is needed and who needs it.
That's great. Thank you both. Thank you all three for your feedback there. I have a specific question actually for Carilyn, and this is you ready? So, what is impeding the counties from adopting the new building codes? Have industry lobbyists played a role? You might not be ready for that one. Sorry.
I think there are a number of challenges facing the adoption of the updated energy code. I know that industry is not always thrilled for a number of reasons. It could be, I think some of the counties are really faced with heavy workload, and they have to work to prep for the councils. Perhaps there may be internal council lack of full accord. There are a number of reasons, I think, why maybe certain councils are not acting. I know they look to the city and county of Honolulu, but counties have moved ahead before on their own.
Great, thank you for that. All right, I have time for one more question here. Let's see. How about this one? Who audits the grid to see that they are maintaining their infrastructure to ensure they are not losing efficiency due to poor maintenance? Probably another one for you.
You know, where's Alan Oshima? I think he can best answer that about grid maintenance and review. I would say that I'm not the best person to address that question.
Maybe just I have a prior background, someone in this space, and I think one, it's from a utility, especially investor-owned utilities, that at the end of the day, it's the customer that's paying for the kilowatt hour. They're not paying for all the losses along the way. And so for most utilities, they are able to recover costs, similar to efficiency programs that, it's a revenue loss for most utilities, and so they're compensated typically for that loss. So usually it's in everybody's benefit to achieve those efficiencies. Whether or not they're driven to it internally or externally, I think is a justifiable question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to please give our wonderful panelists a round of applause, and thank you very much for participating today. It was a pleasure being up here with you. Thank you. Thank you. And now it's Pahana.